C. Blaine Hyatt, MS, spent many years of his adult life in various endeavors, including running a manufacturing business, sales, farming, hypnotherapy, special education teacher, and coach in the public school system, and concluded his career as a professor at Fort Hill State University. Through the years working closely with his wife, Linda Lee Hyatt, PhD, he has worked on multiple projects, giving presentation, developing and conducting seminars, and publishing a variety of articles. He and his wife have four children, 11 grandchildren, and two great grandsons. And on today's episode of Photo Interview, it's a pleasure to have C. Blaine Hyatt on the show. Welcome on the show, Blaine.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show and to have you talk about your book. It's quite amazing to me.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome. So, Blaine, could you tell us about your book, Power of Discovery? How does this book come about? What inspired you to write Power of Discovery?
Well, it's kind of a long story. Let me give you a little bit of background.
Okay.
I never intended to write a book.
Oh,
I do not see myself as an author, never did. That was not something that I ever thought I would ever do.
oh,
But as a young boy, I spent a lot of hours in the field working on equipment and doing other things alone. And I did a lot of thinking, pondering, imagining. There was not much else to do. And I guess my mind kind of became accustomed to thinking, should we say, making connections and thinking kind of outside the box.
mm,
So I've always loved truth, and I love correct principles. I have found in my life that true and correct principles always apply. They always work, no matter where you find them.
oh,
And truth is truth, no matter where you find it. So, with that in mind, I like to tell stories, and I like to make connections with uh, principles and real life things or things I come across in life. And so, as I got older and my grandkids started to come along, well, even my kids, but particularly my grandkids, I'd tell them stories and relate those stories to things that were going on in life, things around us, things that would happen, and principles that apply to those that can make a difference in our lives. And
mm,
so it started out with just telling stories to my grandkids. Well, one year I decided that I would put some of these stories together and just make copies of them and put them in a binder and give them to my grandkids for Christmas.
oh, wow.
So I did that. And a short time later, I found that some of my grandkids were using some of the things that were lessons that were taught in those stories uh, in their everyday life. One of my granddaughters had a school class, and a situation came up where the teacher asked a question. It was about a scenario, and the teacher asked the question, "What will they do?" And my granddaughter said, "That depends." And the teacher, of course, asked her, "What does it depend on?" And she said, "On which wolf they're feeding." Now,
Oh,
that happens to be a story in my book and a story I've told her.
oh, wow.
And that story relates to the fact that we each have two wolves inside of us, a good wolf and a bad wolf.
Mm,
And the one we feed is the one that will dominate, the one that will grow.
oh, wow.
So there's a story and about that in my book. And so that was impressive to me to find that my kids were using these stories and that the principles in these stories, in a positive way to make positive change in their life.
Mm,
And there were several other incidents I shared the stories in my book with a friend who was reading them to her daughter. I think her daughter was 8, 9 years old at the time.
Wow.
And she said she was able to use things from the story
Wow.
to, when things would come up in their everyday life, she'd say, well, which wolf are you feeding? Or what about this? Or what about that? From different stories. She was
Mm.
able to use it to help teach her daughter. And so I thought, if they're good for my kids, they're probably good for other people too.
Mm. Yeah.
So I decided, well, maybe I'll put them together in a book format. So that's what I started to do. So I
That's
selected, uh, I have many, many stories that aren't written yet, but
wow.
I selected the ones that I decided to put in Power Discovery and put them together and got them worked up with the help of my wife. She has always been my editor and
Oh, wow.
my typist and my best right hand, because the ironic thing is language arts is probably my poorest subject in school. I
Oh.
am not good at that, but my wife was excellent.
Oh, wow.
So so it made a good team. So
Absolutely.
what's that?
That's great
Uh,
one.
we got the book put together, and this was back in 2016.
Mm.
And I really don't remember how I got hooked up with the publishing, but
Oh.
I did. I got hooked up with a company called Life Rich Publishing, and they published it for me.
Oh, wow.
And then I was called to serve in my church in a leadership position that made it necessary for me to kind of put this stuff on back burner. It was demanding. It was demanding calling, and so I just kind of set this aside and didn't even think anymore about it really
Oh, wow.
until last year. I was released from that position, and then suddenly there was time to start doing something else again.
Oh, great.
So that's kind of how that came about, and uh, like I said, it wasn't intentionally intended to go into a book, but it ended up that way, which I'm real thrilled about.
That's great. That's very great. I so much love, the stories, the conception, and the things that inspired the making of Power of Discovery. It's quite amazing hearing these stories and seeing how the book at the Fox stage impact your children, and you eventually thought of publishing it out there just so it can impact other people as well. That's quite a great decision to make. Thank you so much. Now, I'm
Well,
curious to know if you experience any challenges while writing your books. If there is any, could you share with us what challenge it is and how you ultimately overcame it?
the challenges uh, really was kind of what I already alluded to. I'm not good at that.
Mm.
I do not. I don't have keyboarding skills. I
Oh,
write everything by longhand. All my stories I write out in longhand.
wow.
Uh, and so I guess the challenge was, or some of the challenge was, it was a bit time consuming. I am not, in fact, I'm a terrible speller. I spell terribly.
Oh,
And so that makes it difficult. I have to stop and look up words and do those kinds of things.
oh.
But because my wife is so great and was so better than I could, and
That's
so she would go through it and fix it and work with the fix spelling and correct the grammar and anything needs to be corrected that way. So really, I would say how I overcame it was with the help of someone else.
that's quite amazing. That's very great. I'm quite intrigued to know about that. Now, I also want to ask you, Blaine, apart from Power of Discovery, do you have any other works you've authored or currently working on?
Well, I have. I just completed. In fact, it was just published in January, so it's just been available for the last 2 months. A book called Old Shop Stories.
Do you have a copy of it there which you can show us?
I do. See that?
Oh, Old Shop Stories. Oh, that's a lovely cover.
Now, this shop
Yeah.
is my dad's old shop. That's where I grew up in that shop. Well,
Oh,
a lot of
oh,
time in that shop.
Wow.
That's my dad's old truck.
Oh.
And so this is the picture of where I where I spent a lot of my childhood
Hmm.
and teenage years.
Oh, wow.
Uh, my dad was a mechanic, did a lot of work for the local farmers and different people around it. He was kind of a picture of everything. And so often there would be a number of men sitting around uh, just talking and telling stories about their growing up and things they had experienced. And,
Hmm.
they lived, this came out of the early 1900s and the Great Depression in the United States of
Hmm.
the mid of the 30s.
Yeah.
And so it kind of developed in the same way Power of Discovery did. A number of years back, probably 15, 20 years ago, I got thinking that when I die, those stories and that history, that culture is going to be gone. I'm the last one that remembers it.
Hmm. Oh,
So I decided to write all these stories that I remembered
great.
hearing in the old shop,
Hmm.
which I did. And it was kind of the same process. I was able to uh, write them out over time. And both these books, obviously, they came about over really quite a few years because I didn't sit down and write to write it. I'd think of a story, I'd write it down.
Hmm.
Maybe a month later, I'd think of another story, I'd write it down.
That's
So
great.
it kind of developed like that.
Hmm.
And then, of course, uh, after I got every story I could remember completed, then I actually, my wife developed an illness and was not able to assist me any longer.
Oh.
So I had a niece that volunteered to get it from my long handwriting into a digital format that could be used. And I have a very good friend that does editing, and she edited my book for me, edited it for me. And
Oh,
again, I was able to get it published. Again, published it through Lifebridge Publishing.
that's great. That's quite amazing. I love the sound of this old shop stories. It sounds very amazing. And the fact that you mentioned that when you die, those stories will die. So you feel the need that it's important to tell the story just so other people can read. So that's a very good point. And I think that's one of the important of writing. It helps to pass on story from one generation to another, just so
Yes,
a particular name do not die. So it's very great. I love that fact. I love the point you made regarding that.
and it's very interesting in that these stories, some of them, you in our today's culture, we'd look at them and say, "Boy, that's hard to believe," but
Hmm,
they're true. They're true stories. They're based in true fact. But our culture, our society has changed so much over the last
absolutely.
100 years that some of them they're pretty good stories. Some of them, like whoa.
Wow, that's quite great to know. Now, Blaine, I also want to ask you, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? What are the challenges you've encountered in terms of marketing your books? And what are the mediums you've utilized so far in promoting both books?
Well, as you may already have picked up in the beginning, I knew nothing. I just didn't even have a clue. And it kind of, in my case, for whatever reason, just merged. One thing kind of built on another. Um, my intent was, as I mentioned, never, well, maybe I didn't mention it, but it was never to sell books. That was not my intent originally.
Oh,
My
wow.
intent was for my family, my posterity,
Mm,
in both cases. Uh, and I wanted to just have a nice book that I could pass on. But as I started to do it, Life Rich Publishing, and I'm not really trying to promote them necessarily because there's
mm,
many companies that do the same thing. So don't misunderstand me there.
I understand.
But as part of their publishing package, they do also do some promotion. They have a promotion part of that. Well, as they started doing that, I began to learn a few things.
Oh.
And so slowly I've learned a little bit. And then I have gotten involved with a couple of other marketing agents that has really helped me to get to this point. I never could have done it on my own. I didn't know how. I didn't even. I've learned things I didn't even know existed in the publishing world.
Hmm.
So I would say that the biggest, if it were a challenge, if I were to try to do it on my own, it just wouldn't have happened.
Oh, wow.
I think, in my view, it was necessary to have, shall we say, specialists, people that know what they're doing, that work in this field and understand how it works, and be involved with them. And I have been fortunate to have some very good individuals to work with that have made a big difference.
Well, that's quite amazing. That's quite great and lovely to know all of these things you've mentioned. So, Blaine, I also want to ask you, is there anything that you would love to share with the viewers about both books, Power of Discovery and the other book that we did not mention in this interview? And I'd love the viewers to know.
Well, we probably pretty much covered it. Um, I might give an example or two. Would that be appropriate here? Um, and this kind of shows how some of this developed. One afternoon, my wife and I were sitting on our front porch,
Mm,
and here in Kansas, there was a big hard wind blowing, which is not uncommon. And we have a big shrub at the end of our porch, so we weren't in the wind because it was protecting us. But as we were sitting there just visiting and just enjoying the day, a dragonfly showed up right in front of us, trying to fly around the corner of the house.
wow.
And after a few minutes, he caught my attention because he just stayed there, flying and flying and flying.
Wow.
And really, it was 15 or 20 minutes. He was still there, trying to get around the corner of the house. And so
Wow.
my mind went to work on that, and I kind of put my mind into that dragonfly's life. And I thought, he will go home tonight and sit down in his easy chair and feel really good about what he's done because he's worked so hard all day. Because
Mm,
he worked hard. And he'll tell his family what a hard day he's had. I just built a scenario around that.
yeah.
When in reality, he accomplished nothing.
Nothing.
So what I built, the principle that I built out of that, and what I built out of that story was that we all work hard, and we uh, think we're accomplishing something, but maybe we need to assess our lives and see, are we really accomplishing things that are worthwhile? How are we utilizing our efforts? Are they really beneficial, or are we just feeling good because we worked hard?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the kind of the outline of that story. What that's about. And that's just one, and of course there are others come from different approaches. But that's just one of the things my mind does.
That's great. I love the fact that all of these things you mentioned are quite educative and quite didactic to me. Now, I also want to ask you, Blaine, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book like yours? What would you tell people? What advice would you give people in this category?
Well, I would say one thing: trust yourself.
Trust
I
yourself.
have struggled with that. You asked what I've struggled with, and I kind of didn't think of that at the time. But one of my biggest struggles is believing that I am capable of publishing a book
Mm,
that has a significant impact, that would have a significant impact on
wow.
people, because that's what I want to do.
Wow.
And I have a hard time because, like I said, writing and language arts is not my thing. And so
Oh,
I have a hard time. I've had to work on wrapping my mind around that I was capable of doing that.
wow.
So I would say one thing is trust yourself, believe in yourself.
That's great.
Uh, Definitely, I'm a strong believer in asking, getting information, talking to people that have had experience, people that have
Yeah.
been through it, people like yourself that
Yeah.
know kind of how it works, and
Yeah.
getting information that will help you and that type.
Oh, wow. That's great. I love your advice. I love your advice, and I'm hopeful that viewers, including myself, would love to utilize it. So, Blaine, could you tell us where can we get a copy of your book, just in case some people are interested in getting a copy?
Yes, there's several different places. I have a website, and all my books are available on my website.
Okay.
They come directly from me, and anybody that wants to order one, I'll be happy. I always sign it, put a little note in there for them. So that's one way. Um, the other would be through Life Rich Publishing,
Mm,
and just by going to Life Rich Publishing and my name, see Blaine Hyatt, that'd be one way of getting that. It's also available on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble. It's available in many, many different
platform.
bookstore accesses that way. Uh, right now, anyone that puts my name in, C. Blaine Hyatt, stuff will come up, or they can find it.
Wow. That's great. That's quite great. And I've left a link in the discussion part of this interview where viewers can get a copy of Blaine's book. So thank you so much, Blaine, for accepting the invitation to be featured on Pure English Literature. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you. You've been a great person to work with and a great help here. So thank you. It's
You're
been great to get to
welcome.
know you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. You're welcome.